Hi, I'm Rob, and welcome to the Uncut Network. Every month we rotate between directors, actors, and super specific genres. We cover everything from exploitation to things your parents will absolutely approve of, relative unknowns to household names, and everything in between. The Uncut Network is the movie podcast of all of the niches, and to cover all those things and more, I'm joined by Mike. Hello there.
Hello.
Andrew.
Hello.
And Amber.
Hi.
I hope you're all doing better than me.
We're getting there.
Yes, today is a director's episode. It's one of the more popular directors that we actually ever had, really, which is surprising. He's from Japan. I guess he's best known for his work as a horror director, but he's not really a horror director.
Not exclusively, no.
I imagine
but I think his his biggest hitters, I would say, are the horror ones.
And that man is Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Start of the podcast like we always do, just introduction to the director. Where did we first learn about him? I'm going to finish with Amber because we've got a super fan in our midst, so...
Oh no, the pressure's on.
Mike. Starting with Mike.
Oh gosh. I can't really remember. I think I saw I'd heard a review of To the Ends of the Earth and it sounded interesting. It turned out that and Journey of the Shore on movie for a time, so I sort of did those back to back and was like, oh, I like these, they're good. And then it's taken me months to actually get around to actually watching any more of his stuff. So I'm slowly sort of picking my way through the back catalogue. But yeah, I think I just sort of stumbled into him and didn't really know what to expect, and sort of always surprised by what he turns out, really.
It's a considerable back catalogue, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, yourself?
I think I won a copy of Pulse on Blu-ray in some kind of, I don't know, Arrow video giveaway sort of situation. And I thought, somehow I'd heard of it. I don't know how I'd heard of it, but I was like, oh yeah, this is supposed to be really good. So I went home and watched it, and I was really impressed. And then a little while went past, and I think one of his later movies was coming out, and so people were discussing him, and someone said, well, of course his best movie is Cure. So I was like, right, okay, well, I haven't seen that, so I'll go check that out. And I think it was when I saw Cure that I was like, okay, I'm now going to go away and just watch everything I can get my hands on, because that was the one that really sold me.
Mm-hmm.
It was very hard to get hold of a lot of them for a good while. He came over with that crest of J-horror directors, but everybody really talked about Hideo Nakata, which is Ring, Dark Water, which are excellent. Mm-hmm. But he sort of got lumped in with that movement. So, Amber, yourself.
Well, yeah, speaking of that movement, I was in university, first year of university, when I really got into Japanese horror. Not Japanese cinema, that was later, but Japanese horror specifically. And it was Ring, it was Ju-On, it was Tales of Terror from Tokyo, it was my beloved shitty anthology series. And then I think I was big on the Tumblr file sharing scene, and someone was like, okay, this is the scariest one, we found the scariest J-horror. And it was Pulse. And I just remember watching The Scene, we all know The Scene that I'm talking about, and being like, this is the worst, scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. I want to die. And from there I kind of got in more of his horror stuff, and then Cure, obviously, which I don't know is traditionally not usually classed as horror, but I think it's like a horror. And then actually I went away from him for a few years, and then about a year and a half ago I got really depressed and was all I wanted to watch was 90s V cinema, Japanese cinema. I don't know why. I was just that was my calling. And then so I started to work my way through the Kurosawa's back catalogue, and I still haven't seen everything. I'm only 20 films in, and he's got 2,000 films, so yes. It's gonna take a while. But I was after I think the 10th film, I was yeah, this guy is my favorite. I'm obsessed with him and I love him. And it's exciting to know I still have so much of a journey to go on with him. Because, yeah, again, I haven't even touched, like, the Yakuza stuff. I'll get there, though.
He's done Yakuza movies? That's news to me. Because
A bunch. Loads of Yakuza movies. Yeah, loads of Yakuza. A lot of Pink films.
I would say there's some Pink films,
yeah, I'm, like, woefully underwatched in Pink. Because I as a woman, I didn't think it was particularly welcoming, but I've since changed my mind and I am expanding my Pink horizon, so I'm excited to see how Kurosawa fits in with that.
Pinky movies. Basically, it's 1960s movie that the studios did, which is basically all sex and violence and lots and lots of nudity, and women weren't treated particularly well in them. It was to get teenagers bums on seats. That was the idea. I guess it worked.
It worked, and they were like huge. Like they did really well. They were very financially viable for studios, and they kind of weren't seen as like, I don't know. They weren't seen as like they were trash. Obviously, a lot of them are pulpy trash, but they weren't cute. They weren't always seen as like derogatory. Like a lot of respected filmmakers got their start in Pink at like Kurosawa himself, and I think they kind of, it was more acceptable in the Japanese film scene that it probably might be in the Western scene. I'm not sure.
Because the thing that's kind of hidden underneath, we'll get to the movies in a moment, but the thing that's kind of hidden underneath the story of directors like Kiyoshi Kurosawa is that they work entirely within the indie space, the studio space. Sorry. The idea of indie movies, while he's been a thing in Japan's only really come about in the past sort of decade, I guess, as indie films in Japan. So all of these movies that he's done, the Pinky movies, it's all studio-based stuff, which is interesting, I think, because the idea of these movies...
I guess you can kind of see there's like almost you can definitely see a kind of downturn in the shall we say, quality of the films. A lot of the films, horror films at least, and genre films that were coming out of Japan, once you move away from that kind of financially viable studio space. But I think it's looking up now. I think things are looking up again.
It's a slow climb, but they're getting there.
Yeah.
So the movies that we're going to be doing, it's unusual this week because we have a fourth, but the fourth is technically a short movie. It's only 40 minutes. So that is technically a short, according to the Academy, which I think is anything under 45 minutes or something like that.
I think it is actually 45 on the dot, so it's right on the point of straddling that divide.
You get a lot in that 40, but those movies are Cure, Retribution, Creepy, and the short that we mentioned earlier, Chime, out this year, with a very unusual release that I imagine we will get to when we get to it.
単に人を殺すだけならここまでやる必要はないでしょうかな。
なぜあんな殺し方したんですか？誰かから聞いたとか。
催眠暗示か。
可能性あるか。
犯罪はいつも特別な意味があるように見える。大体無意味だ。
そんなつもりはない。俺はただ犯罪を説明する言葉を探してる。
この人はどうです？
知らない。
これはあなたですよ。
So the first movie, we're doing it chronologically. First movie is 1997's Cure. I'm setting somebody up for a great fall here, but who wants to have a stab at synopsizing this one? I'm not sure I can. It's very, yeah.
I'll keep it simple. A detective investigates a series of murders linked to the X mark on nearby walls and gradually associates them with a mysterious individual who wanders around asking people questions about their identity.
You get beneath that, and it becomes incredibly complicated.
I don't know how far we want to push into spoilers as to what this guy's doing, but yeah, that's it. If we don't want to get into spoilers, then I would leave it at that.
I'm not sure you can spoil this, really, because it's just pure dread. There's plot developments, but as far as a traditional mystery narrative, which is what this is functioning as, I don't think it's as easy to spoil as, say, Sounds of the Lambs or something like that.
Fair enough.
Okay.
All right.
Long legs.
Well, I'd suspect anyway. I say that as spoilers don't work on me because I just don't listen. So. each to their own. Each to their own. Mike, what is your feelings on Cure?
God. So I come late to the game on Cure. I only literally watched it the other day, and I think it's one I'm like, okay, I probably should have watched this a few more times probably before trying to talk about it, because it's one to like. It does sort of, it's about. Well, I'll just spoil it. It's about sort of mesmerism. It's about sort of guys basically sort of psychologically controlling people to commit murders, and the sort of film is doing that in itself in a weird sort of way, sort of casting a weird spell on you as you're watching it, because it's that thing where just everything just is quite sort of normal but off, which I think is sort of just sums up like Kurosawa in a word. It's just everything just feels off, even when you can't pinpoint exactly what's wrong straight away. It's just everything just feels like just the way. Yeah, so yeah, I like it, but I think I'll love it more probably on rewatches, because as the first one I'm just like having no real idea what to expect from it beyond it being sort of like a serial killer sort of thing. Yeah, strange.
Yeah.
But I can see why it's got the legacy it has.
It's odd that we're doing this around the release of Long Legs as well, with the power of suggestion at its heart.
Yeah. I don't want to say anything about Long Legs yet.
Oh, no,
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, Mike hasn't seen it, so let's.
But there's an inspiration path there.
It is interesting timing.
So, Amber, your feelings on Cure?
I love Cure. I love Cure mostly because I think it's. I mean, it's impossible to look at Cure without looking at the context it's made in. So, I think for me, no other director really sums up Japan's quote unquote lost decade, which comes after the economic boom of the 80s, and then the 90s, that bubble burst, lots of joblessness, lots of high suicide rates, lots of, a general sense of nihilism and hopelessness. And I think Cure perfectly encapsulates that. There's so much in there about this loss of identity on a microcosm of the characters, but like as a whole, I guess representative of Japan at this time, the coming out of this, amazing, we've got all this money, the world is starting to like pay attention to our economy, and then suddenly that's gone. And a lot of the people who grew up in this time and were working in this time, they're called lost for a reason. And I think watching it at this point in time at 2024, it hits me even harder than it did when I saw it all those years ago, because we're kind of in a lot of very similar situations. There is this general sense of hopelessness and nihilism and this kind of fear of being influenced by outside sources. I guess not necessarily like a killer like Mamiya, but, social media and the internet. And I think Kurosawa in general, even before Pulse, when he accurately predicted the internet to a terrifying degree, I think he did it with Cure even beforehand, because, you get something like Mamiya is like he's a blank thing, like the internet, where you can project an identity onto it. And then in that process, you lose the identity that you have. So I think it's a very sad, a very scary film, and it sums up everything I love about Kurosawa, which is it makes me feel like crap, which is a good thing.
I'm sorry I keep on inviting you onto movies that make you feel like that.
I love feeling like crap.
Well, it doesn't hate the sort of depressive laws as Kotoko, because man, that movie is
oh my god,
is a week ruiner. That is.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because Q was kind of like Videodrome, then, isn't it? It's one of these. I'm not the hugest. Is that a word? I'll stick with it. I'm not the biggest fan of Videodrome, but it's one of these movies where you can sort of project onto it whatever you want. Which,
yeah, there's a blankness there, isn't there?
So it kind of brings it ageless quality. It's very much of that sort of late 90s Japanese aesthetic. So everything. It looked like the end of the world in every single movie. The streets were empty. It was all grimy and digital and green and grey. It was ugly. But you can kind of project onto that an awful lot, which is interesting. Not a lot of horror movies do that. A lot of them sort of direct you in a very specific way and don't give you that room for interpretation.
Yeah, I think like...
Usually it's grief, but, you know.
Something I also really... Oh my god, yeah. Yeah, no. Something I also really like about Kyo and Kurosawa's work more in general is this mundanity and these boring, like his work visually should be really boring because it's just a lot of office buildings. It's a lot of men wearing grey slacks and empty warehouses. But he's just so good at making like these mundane spaces like the scariest fucking thing you've ever seen in your whole life. And I think Kyo, the barn is just horrible. It just makes me feel sick just thinking about this kind of weird, uncanny liminal space. But he does that really well, always.
Yeah, I don't understand. There's something there. It's some magical, alchemical thing that he's doing where just the empty space is the most terrifying thing in the world in his hands.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I tried to watch him this time and what is he doing? It's so scary, but I just couldn't get it. I couldn't grasp
think it's shadows and blocking, and he does these long cuts, these long shots, with no cuts, and they always seem to be watching from like just outside. There's usually like a wall or something in the way, and it's always this feeling of like you're watching someone else being watched. It's very voyeuristic in like a very creepy, strange
and like
way.
The sound is like atonal or monotonal. It's like as well. It's always like some sort of very like it like pierces you somehow. The score. I don't know. I don't know if he works. I don't know if I assume he's worked with different composers, or I don't know if he's worked with different ones, or but they all sort of have a similarity in that sort of style. It feels like.
The composer in this was, where are we? Gary Ishiya, who I've never heard of. So I'm sorry I can't shine more of a light on that.
I think what the soundtracks for me, his what makes them stand out to me is the lack of sound a lot of the time. When he does use sound, like the I know we're not talking about Pulse today, but I'm not going to not talk about Pulse. Like the ghost walk in Pulse, it's so scary because it starts in silence and then it has that like ooh, like it's just horrible. But with anyone else, they would have done like a screeching violin type thing. But I think with Kurosawa, and especially in Chime, which we'll get to, I'm sure, but his use of lack of sound is just horrible.
Yeah, the lighting and the sound together, I think, combine to make a texture to his films, which is pretty unique. The closest I can think of is David Lynch, which I don't want to say because everyone compares everything to David Lynch, but the Ghost Walk Impulse, for example, you just feel like he has personally painted those sets or closely directed them.
Yeah.
Because there's not a liminal space anywhere that really looks like that. It's all these muted colors, tertiary colors, the murky shadows, the diffused lighting, and this kind of either silence or low, rumbling, ambient, discordant noise that's just on the edge of your perception that you might not even recognize or notice. But it's there, and it's like jabbing into your subconscious and causing your knuckles to whiten as it goes. And he puts so much effort into that. Once you start paying attention to it and looking for it, you can just tell he has put as much effort into that as to anything more obvious, like directing someone to look a certain way or whatever. He's really orchestrating all that edge of perception stuff really well, and that's what will give you the heebie-jeebies before anything particularly happens.
Absolutely.
It does have scary scenes, not quite as potent as the bit in Pulse that we're talking around. But there is one moment here when the interesting thing of serial killer movies is when it sort of reveals the whole MO to you. And there's one scene in this where he's the Mamiya, I think is his name, is talking to the doctor, the woman doctor. And you just see how he does this whole thing in its entirety. And just how in control of another person he is, a lucid person. It's very uneasy. But nothing happens. He just asks her a few questions, drops some water on the floor, and that's it, really. But terrifying.
Tell me about yourself, and he's just asking questions, and it's almost like a childlike thing of like, they would say like someone's name, and say who, and they'll go your mother. It's like, who's my mother? And that's sort of like repetitious questioning thing, which I know at one point drives makes the protagonist angry, which is obviously different to everyone else who just sort of just like gets sucked into like just reveal. It's actually just read that internet comparisons, like the internet gathering your information to use against you, sort of thing. It's just very quietly disarming and unsettling because he's not actively villain. It's very well played. I should have looked at who the actor is, but he's very understated.
There's that great moment where that one of his first victims, when he's like, "Where's your wife?" And he's like, "Oh, she's upstairs asleep." And he's like, "Why?" And the guy is caught so off guard, and then he's like, "She's sick." And then he's like, "Why?" And again, it is like that, like a child being like, "Why? Why?" But it catches you so off guard. I honestly am really scared of Mamiya because I'm really susceptible. And whenever I watch, like when I watched Midsummer, I was like, yeah, they would have me in a heartbeat. Like any excuse to talk about myself, I'd be gone. I'd be like, yep, let's go.
The thing I like about that scene in the hospital is the jump scare, which is not a normal jump scare, but that moment where there's a reverse cut back and he's right there. And what I love about that is it really captures a sense of like a mini fugue state or like a momentary trance state that might have occurred, and it puts you right into the consciousness of that character and really succeeds in delivering that sense that they've had a petit mal epileptic episode for just like a couple of seconds or something like that, but there's been like a skip in reality, and that sense of derealization or dissociation is conveyed really well, and it's really scary.
Yeah, almost like he's like moved. Yeah, you've like zoned out for a second, and in that time he's moved forward. It's like he's always been there. He's never not. Mamiya's never not been there. Ooh,
is it like invading
creepy.
The film itself?
Yes. Then that comes back to his use of space as well, obviously, which we see a lot of, is the way that he puts two characters together and uses the space between them to make you feel uncomfortable and the general space around them, and that's a really good moment of it.
It's amazing. It never feels like, a lot of his scenes are just like people in a room talking, but it never feels a bit like theatrical or stagey. It's again, I don't know how he does it. Even if it's just like a single, like locked camera or whatever, and then maybe moves it around the room slightly, and that's sort of enough to go like, that's cinematic. But it's like the simplest of things. It's just, I don't know how he manages to like put atmosphere into.
He always leaves you with the sense that something's going on. It's just he's waiting for you to catch up with it. So your eyes are moving around the screen. You're trying to guess what's happening behind the camera, trying to like work it out, and you always feel like you're on a countdown because you need to work it out because something terrible is about to happen or is already happening, and if you don't spot it, it's going to get you. But what is it? And that is the vibe of so many scenes in this movie and in several of the others we're going to look at.
Absolutely.
Like the police murder scene it's just set up, locked off shot, quite far back. You think it's a perfectly normal happening here. Just two policemen going about their business, and bang, shoots him in the head, and then drags him into the police box to carve him up. It's no sort of ceremony to it. In a more traditional horror movie, it'd set that up as sort of a big frightening moment, but not. It just happens. It's mundane. It's normal. The cop's dead, shot in the head, just like that. Very clever.
And I guess that's I think he's like the second person we see go under, I think. So by that point, it's like establishing the pattern for us. So like, oh right, so we sort of get an idea of what this guy's doing. Then we have the hospital scene where we see what he actually does, and then we have his interrogation scene where he tries it on our protagonist. And they've got this weird scene at the end, like where they again this almost liminal space of this where they have this final confrontation. Yeah.
Well, the final scene in is, I don't want to talk about it too much before we get to Chime, because it links so heavily into Chime. It makes Chime almost feel like a coda or a spiritual sequel to this. But that is one, I won't give that away, but that is one of my favorites as well. There was something else I wanted to say, which is I think Cure is one of the best examples, or maybe even the best example, of the way he treats personal kind of depersonalization, existential dread at the personal level. But then he also links that to a wider, like, social ennui, like Amber was talking about the lost decade, but that sense that something has gone terribly wrong in society as well. And by having someone deliberately spreading this kind of existential, psychological disintegration that he is, I think it's a really smart way to link the two things together. The sense in several of his films of something being deeply wrong in society that you can't quite put your finger on, it reminds me of the kind of world building in a couple of Dario Argento's movies, where I think in Phenomena, it's unofficially set in a world where the Nazis won World War II, and that's like the script is based on that, but it's not explicit in the script. And in maybe Tenebrae, it's set in a world where there was a devastating event like an A-bomb or a virus that's wiped out most of the population, which is why the streets are so empty. But again, it's not mentioned in the script. But he comes up with Argento comes up with these ideas and then weaves them into the fabric of the world or the general sense of place when he's making these movies. And they always leave you with something you can't quite put your finger on, something being wrong in the world, kind of in parallel to the plot. And I get the same sense in Cure, in Chime, in a bunch of his films, Kurosawa's movies, where something isn't right. Like, even apart from, there's like a serial killer or there's this mysterious hypnotist or whatever, even beyond that, they're set in a world which is already sinking into hell. And I love that about him.
It's like a social sickness, isn't it? I think what I always find myself coming back to in his films very much on that topic is this apathy. Like there's no fanfares when these people die. They just die, and we don't have a whole lot of, I mean, I know Koji Yakusho is a great actor and he's fantastic, but the most emotion we see from him is when he starts to unravel, and not so much at, the horrible crimes going on around him. And you see that through a lot of Kurosawa's work, is this sense of nobody cares enough. Nobody cares enough that their neighbor is in trouble, or that this woman's been dead in her house or whatever, or that this person is clearly mentally ill and needs help. That's the core of Retribution as well, which we'll get into, is these bystanders doing nothing to help people. And I think in not to get too sociology about it, but in a culture like Japan, which is so traditionally collectivist, and the idea of like begging and screaming someone for help only for them to turn a blind eye and ignore you is very, very sad and scary. Not saying that's at all exclusive to Japan, because it's pretty much like the state of the world in general. But when you do have a country like Japan, which is so focused on community and, you know, being a collective group, that kind of social apathy is a real, like, apocalyptic sickness almost. Like, nobody cares anymore.
Another thing I wanted to say about Kira is that his directorial flourishes when it comes to just nudging you out of a sense of the rational or the realistic are particularly good in this. And the two I want to mention in particular are right at the beginning, when I think the detective's on his way to the first murder scene. He passes a flickering light in a underpass, and he stares into it, and it just like flickers at him for a bit, and then he moves on. And it reminded me of that sense of, you know, fugue states and hypnotic states, how a flickering light can give you an epileptic kind of gap in your consciousness, like push you into a dissociative state. So much so that I went away and looked up whether Kurosawa like was epileptic, because that would make sense to me. His interest in flickering lights and as a harbinger of something bad about to happen. Couldn't find anything on it, but if I ever got a chance to interview him, I would definitely ask him that question.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing was, and I've seen this in more than one of his movies, but the bus scene where people are in a bus, there's like rear projection, but the perspective on the rear projection is really not lined up at all with where it should be. So it's obviously incredibly fake. And there's no mention of it. It just cuts to like, it can cut to someone on a bus and you'll instantly look out the windows and be like, what the hell's going on here? Because it looks so unreal. And then, you know, they'll move on to wherever they were getting to. And it just makes me feel like that's the point where they've crossed some kind of threshold. They've gone into some kind of parallel dream reality or whatever it may be. They're under a hypnotic state or something like that. And I've watched it a couple of times trying to work out exactly how that can work logically within the plot. Like, what is the difference between before this bus ride and after this bus ride? And I can never work it out. But every time it happens, it's like, I get the sense that after you see them on a bus like that, you just can't trust anything anymore.
Moving on to the second movie, which is Retribution 2006, and it feels almost like the start off. That is their starting point. This realm beyond ours. But I know that Mike liked this one a great deal, so I will ask you, what is Retribution from 2006?
Ooh, gosh. So it starts with we see someone drowning a woman in salt water. An investigator comes to investigate, and then these murders seem to happen, but they're all being perpetrated by different people who don't seem to know why they're doing it. So again, it seems quite similar to Cure, but then we are aware of a sort of ghostly figure, woman in red, sort of haunting our main character, and then also seems to be cropping up as well. That's basically it. They're trying to figure out what is linking. It might be linked to to a particular abandoned building in I can't remember where it is in Japan, but in the district. I guess basically, again, on a basic level, but
Some building that was very dominant in the skyline in post-war, wherever this is in Japan. We won't say what that building is because we'll get there. But yeah, in essence. Amber, Retribution.
I really like Retribution, but I came to it much later than his other films. And when I saw it, I was kind of like, oh wow, why aren't more people talking about this one in the kind of same breath as they do with, I don't know, Seance or something, which is another one of my favorites from his. But I just love the story of this without going again into too much spoiler detail. I love the idea of it takes this traditional Japanese like onryo or yurei, like the female vengeful spirit, and kind of puts it on a bigger level. And in that way, it kind of reminds me of Ju-on, because obviously the Seki family and Kayako especially, she doesn't care who she punishes. She just needs to punish somebody. And the woman in the red dress woman in this one kind of reminds me of a similar thing. She's taking out things on any bystander, any passerby. No one is safe. If you've been anywhere near her orbit, you're not safe. I love this one because it's set so close to the ocean, and it's got a lot, like Mike, like you said, there's a lot of water. And I've written quite a bit about the symbolism of stagnant water in Japanese horror movies because it fascinates me, and I bring this up on every podcast, I'm sure. I don't care, I'm going to bring it up again. But there is this kind of Shinto concept called kegare, which is basically, it's like the lack of a flow of energy, and it's associated with it's associated with death. It's also associated with childbirth, which is very interesting, and menstruation. But basically it's like stagnation. It's a severe lack of movement, and it's applied to water as well. So I think a lot of the water you see in this film, you know, the puddles, everything has this like briny amniotic feel to it, which obviously relates a lot to the female ghost. It's just it's one of his more interesting films when it comes to women. I think women in Kurosawa films often get kind of a short stick. Not that men have it any better, of course. But this one, especially in regards to like gender and, you know, femicide is very interesting in that regard. It's wet Japan.
It's very wet, and it uses horror for these incredibly weird set pieces. I remember a lot of the backlash against Dark Water was just sort of the postscript bit and the nature of the horror. People didn't particularly like it, and I imagine there's a scene here which would have got a lot of consternations from people, because I'm not going to give the context to it, but somebody is essentially killed by being pushed into a bucket of water. It's one of these weird little nuances of movies from cultures that you're not a part of. On the face of it, it's just weird, somebody being pushed into a bucket. But there's so much more to it going on than that, I think.
I had to rewatch that bit again because I couldn't believe what I saw. I was like, did that? I absolutely love that moment. But I know what you mean.
No, it's a great scene. And again, it goes back to that like water as kind of a malevolent force that you do see a lot dark water, like you mentioned, but obviously Sadako coming from the damp well. I'm also so obsessed with the way this ghost moves, and I know that you know, people say she reminds them of the ghost from Pulse, but you can even see this kind of ghost earlier in Kurosawa's work. You can see someone very similar in Door 3. And in one of his like Hanako-san shorts, there's like a woman in red, like slowly approaching the camera. But I think this is the film where he really nails it. And this kind of image of her floating across the room in slow motion, but she's also fully corporeal at this point. Like you can feel her very much in this room. He reaches out, they touch each other. It takes the ghost from Pulse and makes her even more, I don't know, it's like the ghost in Pulse, all she wanted was to cross the barrier, and the ghost in Retribution is like actually managed to. And I love the red dress. I love the use of red because so often you see these female ghosts dressed in white or black, and the red is just love it.
Yeah, especially because we've been talking about like with Cure and Kurosawa in general, he has quite sort of like, I don't want to say bland color palette, but it's a quite dull color palette. So the red,
very muted.
Yeah, most of the time. So having a character who's always in red, she obviously makes them really stand out, just amongst the world itself, which is all quite damp and dreary as well.
The way she flies, it could look so goofy if he'd gotten it wrong, but it works. Somehow it works. I think he walks a very fine line, but he pulls it off.
Yeah.
He does. I think that about her like scream as well. Obviously her scream is really scary, but there is kind of an almost melodramatic thing to it that I think in the hands of a lesser director, a woman coming at you and being like, whoa, it could be like very Haunted Mansion. But he something about the way he does it. I don't know how they, the physicality of that actress.
Yeah.
She's just wonderful.
Yeah. I found it absolutely terrifying. Yeah, that scene where she just crosses the room. That's going to stay in my head. And it's like she just slightly widens her eyes. I don't know how, like, that is enough. I don't, again,
Yes.
This is something I don't know how. I think that one is like almost like a pitch black room and you just see.
Yes.
And so obviously there's no real reason why she'd be lighting up the room so much, but she does. And that's, again, so it's that sort of strange. And I think it's also how the actors play off it, like whenever they, and I think this is across all, I know in Chime as well, like how the characters react to the thing sells it a lot as well, because you can tell they're just absolutely terrified by what they're seeing.
We're back to dissociation as well on this one, because very early on he decides to play his hand and kind of point you towards what's really happening. When the detective, having found some clues about, there's the button found at the scene of a crime and so on, he goes back and looks in his own wardrobe and finds a missing button, or a button missing on his own coat. And Kurosawa doesn't really weave it into the visual language and the editing quite as strongly as he did with Cure. So you don't really feel those moments of dissociation, those skips and jumps. But he's definitely playing in that ballpark in narrative terms and causing you to question whether this person is of their right mind, whether they're entirely themselves all the time, and so on. And that's true for all of these movies that we're looking at on this episode. And I think to a certain extent, one of the things that will cause people to like one film over the other is how satisfying they find the cause of these dissociations. In Cure, with the mesmerist and the kind of slippery lack of absolute resolution at the end, I really liked it. With Retribution, it's a different resolution, a different cause of these moments of dissociation, a loss of self. And without saying exactly how it's wrapped up, it is pretty much wrapped up pretty neatly, certainly compared to Cure. And for that reason, I didn't like it so much. Although other people will have different responses. Also, on the point of women having a bad time, I think in every one of the movies we're looking at today, it's in particular the wife has a particularly bad time, either before, during, or at the end of the narrative. I think he's almost comparable to Christopher Nolan in terms of unfortunate wives. I will leave it at that.
Yes.
Although this one, you do have the nice, where one of the sort of victims is a woman who is sort of having an affair with her boss, and that's sort of going wrong. It ends with a quite, I don't know, I don't associate gore with Kurosawa when she's like, no. Well, I don't know how much detail I was going into, but in the bathroom when she's like,
when he goes there, he really goes there.
Yeah, it is really striking because it's only for like a fleeting second, but it's enough to go, ugh.
He does. He knows when to pull back. But yeah, I do like, what's interesting about this one, Andrew, relating to what you said about like the neat wrapping up, is that the English title is obviously Retribution, but the Japanese title is Sakebi, which I believe means scream. So watching it with its English title, you're already kind of in the mind of, oh, this is a vengeance story where our ghost or someone's going to get punished by the end of it. But it's interesting that the Japanese title is different, and it kind of now when I learned the title, I was like, oh my god, that's who she reminds me of. She reminds me of the monk, the Edward Monk, the scream on the bridge, and this kind of like very existential, just pain and anger that like leaks out even after death. But yeah, women don't have a good time. There are some of his films that, like his film not Doppelganger, Seventh Code has quite a badass female protagonist, but in general, I don't think he thinks the world is very kind to women, and he's right.
Yeah, because the female murderer, totally agree with her. Talks the woman, the man who he's having an affair with, says, we're going to do this and we're going to do this, and you're going to have 3 children, I think. And not once does he stop to sort of take breath or sort of consider her as a person. It's just sort of a vehicle for his ambitions to go through. But as far as the women as well, there's sort of other sort of wrinkles that are interesting in this. I'm not sure whether it works, because in Japanese and Chinese folklore, it happened in a movie called, in Japan, a 60s movie called Ugetsu Monogatari, I think of its full title, where there's a myth of certain ghosts that essentially woo people, and if they're successful in that, they'll take you to the other side, and you basically die and become a ghost with them. I'm not sure how I can loop this round to be relevant to Retribution without giving a huge ass spoiler. But, I just dropped that there, I guess.
I think any wise listener will understand what you mean. But yeah, no, it's very much that kind of. Well, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but the last line of the film sums up that entirely, doesn't it? And that goes back to that kind of collective apathy and pain. Before we move on, I need to give a shout out to Koji Yakusho, because he is every time I see him in a Kurosawa film, I know that it's gonna, apart from Charisma, which I don't like, and he leads that one, but he's got this kind of almost every man sense to him, where he's usually playing these characters that are either police officers or, men of the law that we're supposed to root for and are supposed to be really strong. But then he has these moments, like in Cure, for example, when he walks in and the wife he imagines his wife has killed herself. And it's horrible. His reaction is so, like, you see him break down, and then that's why I think he's such a good actor, because he always feels kind of like he's on the edge of losing it, even though he is so strong, and so you want to root for him. And that's why I hate seeing him he was in a film called The World of Kaneko, which I hate, and he plays a horrible villain in that, and I didn't like it. I like it when he's a good guy, and I feel sad for him.
He got his moment in the sun. He got an Oscar nomination with Perfect Days, was it called? That movie from earlier this year.
I think so, yeah, which is really good, very good. Yeah, that was really good, and that was nice because he was back in his like lovely hero role. I mean, I have a crush on him, so I don't want to see him as a bad guy. I'll be very honest.
I get that. He's a handsome guy. He really is.
Very handsome.
That brings us to the part of the show we're going to be picking who comes up in a upcoming episode. And for this upcoming episode, it's a actors cycle episode, which means we've got somebody to pick, and I think we're going to tie it in with a movie that's been very popular this last month or so. Gregory Peck.
Yeah.
Legend of,
good choice.
I guess, 50s through 80s Hollywood.
It's good that you're choosing to do this to coincide with the release of To Kill a Mockingbird. That's 2 the number.
Yeah, I won't be surprised if it did that.
Yeah,
actually.
good point. I mean, there was a written sequel to that actually by Harper Lee, I think. Yes.
Harper Lee.
Shockingly, Hollywood hasn't tried to bring that one to the screen, regardless of adaptability.
I mean, Gregory Peck is a great sort of. It has that charisma, that very manly charisma of many actors of his generation. Don't think he got the same sort of credibility or legacy as other people from his generation who still sort of have some sort of remaining legacy now.
I mean,
whereas most people who know him
still
now.
talk to Kill a Mockingbird.
I think it depends. Yeah, I think it depends on which audience you're talking about. I think amongst for those who would, I don't exclusively mean people who belong to like the American Film Institute or BAFTA for that matter, but Gregory Peck, I think, remains a lofty figure.
He is the household names and he is not, is all I'm really getting at. Which is, I don't think he's widely known outside of the people who are knowledgeable.
The beast cometh. I just spotted a cat out of the corner of the recording booth. The creature is creaking.
Yes, the creature is featuring.
But yes, Gregory
Peck
has like the classic obvious answer is always going to be The Omen.
Yeah,
it's
kind of grim call out, but Gregory Peck really tried to kill his son there. You know, unbelievable. Can't believe he'd do that. Did David Warner get decapitated by plate glass?
Cape Fear's in also. Oh, David Warner's in that as well, isn't he? He's great too.
Oh, we should probably do a David Warner episode. I'll watch pretty much anything for him now, to be honest. Even stuff like Ice Cream Man.
He's brilliant in everything.
Yeah,
not everything is brilliant, but he's brilliant. He's great.
Yeah.
Make sure, when you do a David Warner episode, make sure you include one of his Star Trek appearances, but not Star Trek 5.
Cape Fear is also another good one, even though it's more well known for the De Niro version.
I'm just checking if you did a Mitchum episode, because...
yeah, we did a Mitchum episode, but we didn't do that.
You did not do Cape Fear. That's fair.
Well then,
it's a potential.
Cape Fear might be a good one to go for in relation to Peck. I think you've said The Omen, but I really feel To Kill a Mockingbird.
It's his film.
It's incredibly obvious, but I think it needs to be done. I mean, yeah, he won his Oscar for that. It's probably his
damn good performance,
memorable role. It is, and it's a great movie too. And I remember actually when Peck died, he got a dedication thing. I think it was at the Oscars, and whomever it was that introduced this started off by saying Atticus Finch. And another thing, I mentioned the American Film Institute when they did, whenever it was, a list of their 100 greatest heroes and villains. Atticus Finch came perhaps the number one hero in American cinema. The top villain was Hannibal Lecter, if anyone wanted to know. You got to think, hang on, a lawyer got to be the greatest hero ever? What's that all about?
Yeah, and then you watch the film and I'm like, oh no, now I know why.
yeah, fair enough.
There are some other interesting things like Boys from Brazil, where we did Spellbound, a Hitchcock movie. Not seen that one.
No. He's in a cute comedy with Audrey Hepburn, Roman Holiday.
That's true.
Very, very famous movie. Moby Dick, he did a version of that, which...
So he did, yes. Ooh, tricky. There's quite a... Well, I mean, the guy had an amazing career. It's not surprising. It's difficult to pick just 3. Well, it will be difficult.
But, he's a classy actor who, looking forward to doing. Absolutely.
犯罪心理学者の高倉は妻と幸せな日々を送っていた。
うまい。
何言ってんの？
これは未解決ですね。一家3人が行方不明になった事件です。
未解決の一家失踪事件。
一人だけ女の子が残されてます。どうしてその子だけ残されたんでしょう。
あれはいつだったか。母が電話で誰かと話してました。
安子何かあったの？
そして奇妙な隣人家族。
西野さん、変人っていうか取り付く島がないっていうか、
二つのつながりは本当の恐怖の始まり。
今度うちにいらっしゃってください。面白いものもお見せできますし。
どうしたの？何があった？
あの人、お父さんじゃありません。全然知らない人です。
ねえ、ご主人と僕とどっちが魅力的ですか？
夫婦に迫り来る不気味な闇。二つの謎に隠された真実とは。
待て、何が望みだ？
別に何も。
安子、俺が全力で君を守る。
Yes, I'm going to take this one because I don't want to do the synopsis for Chime because I don't think I could.
That means I have to do it.
I'm sorry.
God's sake.
I could try Chime, but operating at about 40%
No, it's fine.
and just talk loads of gibberish. I guess Creepy, a 2016 movie. His 2016 movie is the simplest of the four that we're talking about. It stars it's about a police investigator played by Hidetoshi Nishijima. Very successful. He understands the psychology. And at the beginning, he's in this case that goes horrifically wrong. So he has to basically leave the police, becomes a university lecturer, and he moves to a new place in town. I assume it's Tokyo. Tokyo's like the size of England, so it's all Tokyo. So he moves next door to this creepy guy, as the title suggests, called, what is he called again? It's Nishijima, was it? Yeah, there it is, Nishijima. Nishino. Who, he has no sort of social cues. He's very weird, but it's very heavily suggested that he may have some sort of connection to a spate of weird family murders, family disappearance cases that are going on around town. And inevitably it all connects, but I will leave it sort of empty, or what the crosses ticked there. I'm really sorry for the language. I've had a bad day today, so I'm being a bad host. I'm sorry.
Not at all.
But that is Creepy in essence. Andrew, what are your feelings on Creepy?
One thing that I really like about Creepy is that it has the quote that I think most encapsulates that kind of link between personal and social disintegration, which is at one point the creepy guy of the title, in kind of apologizing for his behavior at the very beginning of the film, says, and I've got the quote here, "People around here are so unfriendly and antisocial, I guess it rubbed off on me."
Mm-hmm.
And that idea of antisocial behavior, antisocial attitude being contagious, or kind of bad attitude and bad vibes being contagious is, I think, a strong idea for Kurosawa. We kind of see it in Cure and Chime we will get to, but I think it's in Creepy where he really pushes that as being something that you can be ensnared by and infected by, and that you can then pass on to other people. There are kind of fantastical versions of that idea in his movies, but I think there were reflections of a more straightforward idea and concern that he has, which is that everyone in a society is responsible for the upkeep of that society. And when things start to go wrong and that society starts to crater, everyone gets sucked down into that vortex and everyone turns on each other, and the malaise just spreads. And this idea of an infectious malaise, I think, is one of the key ideas that runs through a whole bunch of his work. So I like that. I like that quote from the creepy guy. I guess it rubbed off on me, even though I don't think this is a great a particularly big spoiler, he's bullshitting. It's like it doesn't need like it's everything's his fault. So he's not the victim there at all. But I like the idea anyway.
I think what makes Creepy work so well is Teruyuki Kagawa as Nishino. He is, and I mean this with deep respect to this man, he's a fantastic actor. Dude looks creepy. He's got this this almost uncanny smile where he smiles with his teeth but not with his eyes.
Yeah.
It never gets up there.
I was going to comment on the smile, yeah.
His smile is so... It puts you on edge. And half the time throughout Creepy, but when I was watching it, I was like, okay, am I being an asshole here? I'm really judging this guy. And he seems a bit weird, but he hasn't, so far, I haven't seen him done anything wrong. And I think that's why he works so perfectly. And also, if you've seen him in Kurosawa's other film, well, he's in a couple, but Tokyo Story, which is not a horror, although if you're over a certain age and working, then it is horror. But he plays a father in that who is kind of... He's not a monstrous father, I would say, but he definitely wants to he wants to hold on to this kind of like traditional Japanese family unit where he's the patriarch and they don't really have a whole lot of freedom. And to see him in this, when you have that film in mind, makes this film even scarier. He's great at playing this guy who feels like he's on the outskirts of normality, especially in Japan. There's a great moment where he asks the wife, whose name I can't remember, I'm so bad at names. He asks the wife basically if he can refer to her in a less formal term, even though they don't really know each other. And not being Japanese, I don't want to speak for Japanese people, but having lived there, that is quite a weird thing to ask someone if you can. It's like saying to a stranger, like, can I call you honey or like baby or something? And again, it's like, it's that weird social awkwardness where she doesn't want to say no because there's something not right about this guy. But also as a woman, I felt sick watching that scene because I've been in so many positions, I'm sure so many women listening have, where you're like, is this guy being creepy or am I overreacting? And ladies, you're not overreacting. Walk away every time. Walk away from the creepy guy. If that's what we can learn anything from this film, to walk away from him.
The barbarian factor of just...
Yes!
Oh, such a good comparison. Yeah, it's a weird mix of like serial killer and like domestic horror. I think particularly it's actually quite comparable to the hospital scene in Cure. There's a moment where he meets the wife outside somewhere, and just very slowly over the course of the scene, he's getting closer and the camera's getting closer to them as well. And you can just really get that sense of like invading the personal space. And like when he comes over for dinner, and it's all this very sort of awkward, anxious. Those are like easily the best bits. I think.
I love this. I love the bit where she brings stew over.
Yes.
And there's that sense of what's happening inside the house. And I think this is a very interesting idea because what goes on behind closed doors is a big idea here. It reminds me very much, in fact, of... I'm not going to make any more apologies for comparing him to David Lynch. I think there is something to say. I know it's a cliche. I'm just going to do it anyway. But Twin Peaks: The Return. This idea of there's being something rancid going on behind people's, in America, white picket fences, and the equivalent here, behind closed doors, behind the neat hallway. And when the daughter, peeps over the creepy guy's shoulder and just kind of shakes her head like, do not come in, and then immediately leaves to get out of the situation. It really conveys a sense of you don't want to know what's going on in this house, which I thought landed really well.
Yeah. There's such a, like you said, this kind of suburban rot to these perfect. I also love at the beginning of that stew scene where she's like struggling to hand it to him, and she's clearly like, oh no, I'm gonna spill it, and he's just like looking at her like hands down. You're like, oh my god, this guy, he's just awful. He's just the worst. But he's so, yeah. That's again, it's Teruyuki Kagawa's performance. There's just something off about this man.
But also a bit like pitiable, like when you sort of see him, when he's like asked about his job, he's a bit cagey about him. You see him on the tube, and the way it doesn't seem to be. Is he even going to work? What's he even doing with his time? Yeah, and it's like, oh, it's a little bit sad. And actually, sorry.
No, carry on.
Yeah, and I was going to say another thing. Like Andrew said about the antisocial thing. It's interesting. There's almost like a red herring, like right at the start when the detective who was living next door to the creepy guy, they like dropping off chocolates, and they go to their first neighbors first, and she says something like, she basically turns down their chocolate or whatever it is. It's like, I've got a sick mother indoors, and there's something a bit like cagey and suspicious about her. So it's almost like sort of thinking like, oh, is this where the sort of mystery is going to be? And then we meet the creepy guy, and it's like, oh no, wait, no, this guy's even though he doesn't really do anything wrong per se, until like again, it's just
that wrongness, isn't it?
It's the vibes.
Yeah,
I think that first neighbor says something like. I don't like forming relationships with my neighbours. Right. They're too much of a burden. That.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah. It's very much that kind of. I mean, I think Creepy has a lot to say on familial abuse and kind of the idea that the person who is sharing your home is not the person you thought they were, but on a wider scale. It's that, again, that idea of sharing a neighborhood and even larger, a country, a world with people who could be anyone. And I think Kurosawa is quite scared of where humanity's going. And again, I think a lot of this is due to him being Japanese and growing up in such a collective society. But he sees this apathy between neighbors as, again, like this social rot that will eventually lead to violence and death, and then people not caring about it. So I think he kind of doesn't have the best idea about humanity, which I don't blame him.
Yeah, you can't really.
Yeah, you understand where he's coming from. I mean, Japan's one of the few countries in the world where the population's actually shrinking year on year. So this sort of apathy to your fellow man in that country is... there's political reasons for it too, of course, but apathy for your general man is running rampant in Japan. And also the dog knew.
Definitely, and there's also this very...
I was going to comment on the dog, yeah. Marcus?
Max.
Oh, sorry. That's almost like the worst thing when he seems to be like getting along with the dog. It's like, that's suspicious. What's he done to the dog? Because the dog goes like missing for a bit.
Because you always think dogs can always tell, can't they? But he fooled even the dog. Yeah, I guess there's also like a lot of Creepy comes down to this fear of the other and this fear of like making waves and causing a fuss in this neighborhood. You know, that clearly the scene where the house explodes, for example, and I know Nishino is in on it, but he's just sat there like silently watching TV, like ignoring what's going on. There's this very strong cultural sense of like not getting involved, not making trouble. That person's clearly mentally ill. I'm just going to ignore it because I don't want to get involved. And then look where that gets us. Also, some great evil rooms in Creepy. The king of evil rooms returns.
Is this a good point to bring up Longlegs, or are you waiting for Chime?
Mike, take your headphones
out. I'm seeing it tomorrow.
This is not a spoiler for Longlegs.
No, okay.
Whilst everything's going on with the wife going next door and meeting this creepy guy, we have the parallel plot of the husband, who's an ex police detective with an interest in forensic psychology. Now he's one of Kurosawa's kind of almost stock characters in that he's driven. He's a driven detective who's super focused on the work and probably should be less focused on the work and more on his home life, but he isn't, because he's driven to uncover the truth in whatever it may be. And he investigates a cold case because he has that need within himself. We seem quite bored after a lecture, and then he asks someone, what do professors do after they've given a lecture, which almost sounds like he's trying to construct a new persona for himself. Like he's left the force after a screw-up left a couple of people dead in the kind of, opening sequence. And now he's a teacher, and it's like he doesn't know who he is anymore. So we're back to this kind of constructing your sense of self and the fragileness of your sense of self and how it can be undermined and so on. And he literally has to ask someone, what do professors do after giving a lecture? Yeah. He's like, we'll do some research in their specialized subject, which is an incredibly obvious answer, but he's like, oh, okay, I guess I'll do that. And then on the back of that, he ends up uncovering a cold case and gets kind of interested in it, almost on like a hobby level, and then gets hyper fixated on it and goes to the quote-unquote crime scene, which he's not sure is a crime, but a bunch of people have gone missing in the past. And when he gets there, he just says, oh yeah, I can see why this was categorized as a crime now, even though it's just a missing persons case with no resolution. I get why this is categorized as a crime, because this feels like a crime scene. And I think he says it like 2 or 3 times. He's just staring at this house, first from a distance, then closer, then a bit closer again. And he's just looking at it going, yep, definitely a crime. Just by looking at the house.
You just open the gate and then don't go any further. It's like, no, we don't need to go in.
Exactly. And this is not a spoiler for Long Legs, because it's very, very early on in the film. But there's a moment where Michael Monroe and her partner, as FBI agents, get out of a car, and they're going to go door to door looking for someone, and there's like, they're investigating a crime. And Michael Monroe just like looks up and down the street, and she points at one house, and she's just like, this one. And it reminded me of that, because it's just like a person looking at a house and going, yep, crime.
They can sense evil.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can feel the rot. I think it's very telling as well that the house is the evil room in this case. It's that kind of suburban domestic place, isn't it?
It's even like the first time when the wife goes round and he's like, oh, do you want to come meet my wife? And there's this it feels really hostile, and it's just an innocuous thing, and then the daughter comes in and oh, we're going to go meet mother, and it's just silence, it's just awkward, and the wife can sense it. She's like, I'm just going to go. She can just sense it. I don't think I want to meet his wife, even though I've not seen her.
She said anything like you, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So who's gonna marry you? They're probably worse. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's just that psychic level. And of course, affects because when the investigators this cold case, there's this disappearance, but there was one girl left, and so he finds her. And again, she's psychologically affected by what's happened to her. Of like, she's. Well, yeah, he does. To be fair, he full on like assault at one point, basically, isn't he? But she's like clearly she's like forgotten a lot, and it takes a lot to sort of for him to sort of put the pieces together. But essentially, sort of the after effects of that as well. We see like all stages of this sort of evil setting in to people, like spreading to people.
There's quite a fun metaphor for filmmaking in Creepy as well, which is something that I think pops up in more than one of his movies, if you're looking for it, which is at one point the lead character walks past a lecture hall where there's a discussion going on about a serial killer, and you just overhear a snatch of it, and the guy says, yeah, he kidnapped 4 women and he tied them up and he flew them on his plane to a forest in the mountains, and then he hunted them with a rifle. And then the guy just says, everything's bigger in America.
It's such a weird moment. That.
I couldn't work out what this was thematically for the movie until I realized it's just a gag about filmmaking, like what American filmmakers are able to do or what budgets they have and things like that. But it just made me giggle.
Yeah, I don't think Kurosawa gets enough credit for how funny he is.
True.
Like, I know we talk about how horrible and dread-inducing his films in, but it's something like, I don't know, like Eyes of the Spider has like some really funny slapstick moments in it. I think that he's one of those filmmakers where people are like, am I allowed to laugh? Like, yes, if it's funny, you're allowed to laugh. He's clearly making fun of like the absurdity of social situations a lot of the time. I was howling at Creepy. Like the stew thing absolutely sent me. Like so funny because it's so awful.
Yes, and looking around at the violence as well, that's kind of this level of slapstick to it. It's grotesque, don't get me wrong, but it has that same sort of sense of spontaneity and just matter-of-factness that Kyo had when somebody's getting shot, but it doesn't have sort of the slashing, it doesn't have anything like that. It has people putting vacuum bags and the air sucked out of them, which is just weird to the point of, is this funny? Is this weird? I'm not sure what's going on here.
Yeah, it's a sort of like moving the body scene where it's like being instructed what to do as you're doing it. It's there's definitely a sort of dark comedy to.
Just general feelings on Kurosawa's work within the horror genre, and any in particular movies that we haven't talked about today that you think need not necessarily the eye shown on putting on them, because Pulse doesn't necessarily need any sort of people to make it more of a public thing. But I'm rambling now, so I'm just going to say movies that you like from his stuff.
I am very excited for his next one called Cloud, which it's something, I can't remember the exact synopsis, but it's something about someone reading something on the internet, and it looks like maybe an evolution of Pulse. It looks like he's still playing in that horror genre, which he kind of moved away from for a few years, or I guess he's always been like in the thriller space at least. But Cloud to me almost looks like a slasher. There seems to be a lot of like killing going on, and I'm really very intrigued how he goes with the internet, because the internet has changed so much since Pulse, but also in a way hasn't changed at all. So I'm very interested to see where he goes with Cloud. If anyone gets eyes on Cloud,
I'm crossing my fingers it's at Venice.
Sorry.
Ooh.
Just to give context to that, according to Letterboxd, it's about an ordinary thing who supports himself by reselling on the internet, and he makes enemies of everybody around him, and he's dragged into a desperate struggle that risks his life. So, yeah, that's just on the button. Yeah,
very into that. As someone who gets in fights on the internet, I'm very interested in that.
Sounds like a sort of continuation of Chime as well, to a degree.
Yeah.
If maybe that's part of his general exploration of modern technology. Like, let me try an NFT just to see what it's like, even if I'm just for research purposes, basically.
I'm really hoping he's on a roll with Chime and then into Cloud, because if he stays at that level, Cloud could be something really special. Which again, I don't want to jinx it, but I am crossing my fingers.
Well, the poster's very ominous. It's sort of windows where you can't see through, but you can see somebody through, sort of like pebble dashy windows, and somebody with a bag on their head with holes cut out over their eyes. So it's an ominous image. Yeah.
Very.
Mike, yourself, feelings on this horror stuff, and just anything particular from the stuff that stands out to you?
I've got quite. We've got a few gaps. Well, I guess give a shout out to Sweet Home, which is quite fun. It's all quite different. Oh, actually, of course, Guard from the Underground. That's the other one, of course. That came out recently. They were on Third Window recently, which is sort of like arguably his like first brand of horror, I'd say. And that's although it's a frustrating one of like that looks like it's gonna have a female protagonist, and then it sort of changes halfway through, which is a bit of a shame.
She's kind of a bit of a drip as well.
She's a bit, but it's also it's that strange sort of, there's a sort of vaguely cosmic horror to the main guys.
I Yeah,
Massive.
I really like it.
Yeah, it's very. So I'll definitely give that a shout out. If you like the Kurosawa vibes, is a good early stab at it, I think.
The mythology behind the mythology behind Sweet Home is that it was the inspiration behind the Resident Evil games. Whether there's any truth in that, I don't know, but that's the legend.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
yeah.
I remember hearing that as well. Yeah.
So this is totally my podcast, and I'm not a fifth wheel at all. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
We're waiting for you to guide us.
Yeah. Was it fifth wheel? The fourth of us here.
I've had a bad day, all right, Mike. So it's worked out very, very
It's the creepy shadow in the background.
Yeah, Rob's got the chime ghost behind him.
Oh, I don't, because my corridor getting up to the flat where I live, it feels like a hospital corridor, so you're really not helping me.
Sorry.
To wrap up, so at that point of the show, where can we find people online? Mike, yourself?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter under @AutisticHorror, and I'm on Letterboxd @MikeLuch, also writing reviews for The Geek Show.
Andrew?
You can find me online on my blog, whitlockandpope.com, where I mainly talk about cult horror, the fantastique, for want of a better word. Can't even get that word out, but never mind. The fantastique, that'll do. And also on Twitter /X, again @whitlockandpope.
And Amber?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram @HornbloodFire. I will also do a shameless self-promo and say if you like Kurosawa films and other filmmakers in the director's company, I have physical essays on Era 444's release of The Crazy Family and 88 Films Evil Dead Trap 2, and another one that I can't say yet, but if you're going to Fright Fest this year, you might be able to guess. So yeah, if you like Japanese horror, then pick them up, I guess.
We will be picking up Kiyoshi Kurosawa for the final episode of the series, where we're looking at his just as copious filmography with, again, I'm talking in tongues today. I'm sorry. There's lots of stuff that he's done outside of horror. We'll be talking about that in the last one of the series. But next week we are talking about Gregory Peck, so I assume that the Omen's going to come up there. Pretty certain, let's be honest. But until then, thank you very, very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.